All right, 1 Samuel chapter 27. Remember how chapter 26 was formed. This is David, and he's got his 600 men, and King Saul is out trying to kill him. Saul has brought 3,000 soldiers with him, pursuing David and his 600 men. David's group is way outnumbered. Saul has brought his choice men against David, and they thought they were getting them cornered. And Saul camped out for the night, 3,000 of his men around him, and his commander of his army beside him. And David and one of his nephews snuck into that camp in the middle of the night. That was Abishai. And they snuck down there through all those men, came to the center of the camp, and took Saul's spear, which was equivalent to his scepter as a king, and his jug of water. And then they got out of there, went down the hill. They were camped up on a hill. They went down that hill, through the ravine, back up on a hill on the other side, and David called out, woke them all up, and showed how he had been right there beside King Saul, yet didn't take his life, persuading him that David was a good guy. He was on the king's side. He wasn't trying to hurt him. He was trying to be an ally to him. And that it was those who were around King Saul who were persuading him against David. They were feeding him that line and encouraging him to pursue David. Saul didn't like David anyway because David was going to take the throne. And Saul was trying to cling to it. And then others fed into that and nurtured it in Saul. And so they had him out pursuing David without stop. And Saul repents at that point. And as chapter 26 ends, you have this at the very end. Saul said to David, "Blessed are you, my son David. You will both accomplish much and surely prevail." So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. So that clues us in. David still doesn't trust him. Even though Saul has repented again, and he's done it before, but he turns back again to his old ways. And so David's sort of expecting that, and he's covering himself. He doesn't go back with King Saul. They're not walking arm in arm. Saul goes back one way, and David and his men go the other way. Now, where's David going to go? This is how he arrives in chapter 27 at a city called Ziklag. First going to a city named Gath. What do you remember about Gath? Who owned Gath? Who was there? Well, this was the place where we read about Goliath and his kin being from there. So Goliath, that's Philistine territory. That's enemy territory. And so when David leaves Saul, what he does is he goes to Gath. He goes to be with the Philistines. And so chapter 26 is preparing us for how David arrives at Gath and ultimately a place called Ziklag. And that's what we're reading this morning, chapter 27, verses 1 through 7. Then David said to himself, I want you to note that. I want you to think about this. David said to who? He's talking to himself. How do we talk to ourselves? In our head, in our thoughts, in our emotions. And we give ourselves a good talking to about some things. And sometimes we talk ourselves into some things that we shouldn't talk ourselves into. And that's one of the blessings of being together as church. We sort of are a governor to one another. We're a place to sound some things and get some better information back and remind each other. And when we start talking to ourselves about things that we shouldn't be thinking that way, we have each other as a sounding board to say, wait a minute, let's remember this, let's remember that. And so we're good for each other that way. At least we should be. That's one of the purposes we have, is to encourage each other in good things in faith. So David said to himself, "Now I will perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than to escape into the land of the Philistines." Saul will then despair of searching for me anymore in all the territory of Israel, and I will escape from his hand. So David arose, crossed over, he and 600 men who were with him, to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And David lived with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each with his household. David had how many men? 600. If each of them are married, how many does that make? 1,200. And we don't know how many might have had more than one wife. We're reading about that here and there. But we're at least at 1,200 if they're all married. And do they have any kids? Well, we talk about having a couple, 3 kids today, and that's, okay, they might have had more than that. But suppose they were married and they had 2 kids. David's traveling around with a small city. I've been traveling through Arkansas before. You get to those signs, population of this town, population of that city. I've been through some of those where those signs, the population of a certain little city is not as large as what David might be traveling with here. So he's got a little city with him now as he's moving around, and it's going to keep on growing. So he's got 600 men, verse 2, who are with him, and takes them to Achish, the king of Gath. And he lived there, each of his men, verse 3, with his household. Even David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. Now it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he no longer searched for him. I've always thought it was interesting. Saul would search high and low for David everywhere he could, but the one place he never went was among the enemy. Those are the people he ought to be after. Those are the people he ought to be seeking out, the ones he ought to extinguish from the land. But when David goes to be with the Philistines, Saul says, okay, well, I'm not going there. And he stops searching for him. Just a strange priority that he has. Verse 5, then David said to Achish, if now I have found favor in your sight. And I would like you to think about that. I want you to think about David said to himself, and I want you to think about how we arrive at this in verse 5. If now I found favor in your sight, let them give me a place in one of the cities in the country, that I may live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you? Gath is the royal city. That's the big one of the Philistines. This is where the king resides. And David said, I'm not worthy. I'm not to be in Gath with you, with all my men. Just give me one of these just give me some little town somewhere, some place where it's not populated and we can just go there. It's a ghost town. Just give me a ghost town and I'll take my men there. Why should I? I'm not worthy to be here with you. So this is how he's talking to him. So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. The number of days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. Almost 1.5 years. He's lived among the enemy. All right. David's self-talk. Tell me about it. What did you think about in verse 1? When David said to himself, I'll perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than to go live among the Philistines. What were your thoughts about that? It doesn't make sense with what God has already done for him. At every single turn, where Saul has pursued David, looks like he's got him cornered, God delivers David. We would call this a providential care of God, where every single time David slips out of his hands. David gets the upper hand. Saul's life ends up in danger, not David's. And so every time something happens, whether Saul's throwing a spear at him and trying to pin him to the wall, or whether he's chasing him around the country and can't quite catch him, or goes into a cave thinking he's safe, God delivers David every single time. So it doesn't really make sense. His self-talk is not good talk. It's not right. He's forgetting that God has delivered him. If God's brought him through all of these things, God's going to continue to watch out over him. So he is moving in what he's telling himself in his own mind. He's moving himself a wrong direction. We should never think that the best place for me is among the enemy. The best place for me is among the unbelievers. The best place for me is among those who believe contrary to the Word of God. That's never the best place for us. It wasn't for Lot. And it wasn't for David, and it's not for us. So he's telling himself this. Now, I want to draw your mind back into chapter 26, verse 19. When David is persuading King Saul that I'm not against you, I'm for you, and if I've done something against God, then I'll repent and I'll make the appropriate sacrifices. But if it's men, if it is men, cursed are they before the Lord. For they have driven me out today so that I would have no attachment with the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. This is how David's persuading Saul. If it's men, or if I haven't offended God, if I haven't done anything wrong, and it's the men around you who are persuading you to chase me down, to chase me out of the country, chase me out of the land of Canaan, chase me out of our inheritance, well, let them be cursed of God for that, so that I would have no inheritance among the people of God. And it's as if they're saying, David, we don't want you here with us. Go serve other gods. David is actually feeding himself a line now in chapter 27 where he is bringing that on himself. He has convinced himself that that's the only hope he's got in life, is to go live among other gods. So he's bringing that into reality for himself by choosing not to trust God, to trust his own ingenuity, his own way of escape. And now, for almost a year and a half, he's living among the Philistines, among their gods, having to do things that please them, and he's taking a small city with him. But you think about the choices that he's making here. Verse 5, then David said to Achish, if now I have found favor in your sight. How would David, he's been living in Gath for a long enough period of time. He's been living in Gath under the direct eye of the king of the Philistines, the king of the city. He is right there with them where they all can observe him. How would he find favor in the sight of the Philistines? Would that be anything good? He's chosen a life that requires him to live practicing deceit. He has chosen a life where you have to be a deceiver in order to survive. What is he doing that he would win the favor of the king of the Philistines so that he would be given a city of his own? What has he been doing? How has he been persuading him? What's he been living like? How's he been acting? Has he been keeping the Sabbath? Has he been worshiping God? Has he been making the sacrifices to God? Has he been doing any of these things? How would you win the favor of this Philistine king? We're not told exactly anything about that, but it does make you wonder. He's living a deceitful life in this particular path that he's chosen. Do you remember back? He's been at Gath before. Did you remember that back in chapter 21? And what happened the first time that he went there among the Philistines? The first time he was there with Achish. What happened the first time back in chapter 21? He arrives there, he's running from Saul, he goes to hide out among them, and what happened? All right. right, you're back in chapter 21, beginning in verse 10. And especially verse 11. But the servants of Achish said to him, Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of this one as they danced, saying, Saul is slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Isn't this the guy who killed our brother in arms, Goliath? Isn't this the one who's been going around the land killing 10,000s of us? And David was afraid for his life and left. My question is this: what's changed? What has changed these few chapters later so that David can go there and win the favor of King Achish? What has he had to do to convince him that I'm not that guy? The Philistines have not forgotten who he is. They know who he is. So David's been doing something, at least very deceitful, to change their mind and convince them about himself. Well, back in chapter 21, the way David escaped that, because he figured his life was in danger, is he began acting like he'd lost his mind. Scribbling on the door, drooling, that sort of stuff. And Achish said, away with him. I don't need a madman. Got enough madmen around here. I don't need another crazy guy. Get him out of here. And that's how David escaped with his life. So after they remembered in his hearing who he was, what he'd done, how he was their great enemy, and a leader of the Israelites, then David acted like he was crazy, out of his mind. That's how he got out of there. So now he's come back. Well, if he's in his right mind, then he must be that guy. But he does something to convince them he's their friend.
They may have also heard or seen back to Saul's pursuit of constantly.
Right.
He's running with Saul. So if you're a brave leader, someone back in that, he'll just keep running. He's got a nation.
So maybe he's convinced them King Saul is pursuing me, enough that I'm done with it. I'm through with him. I'm through with the Israelites. I'm out of there. They're no longer my family and my friends, and I've got no allies there. I'm for you guys now. Maybe he's convinced them that, but that's deceitful. He's living this life of deceit. And however he does it, Kevin?
I think Achish is well aware of the animosity between these two enemies of his, and he's hoping that he can continue to put them against each other, and it'll work to his favor.
Yeah, that somehow Achish is going to be able to manipulate, to maneuver this, where he can get David and Saul fighting against one another and polishing each other off, and that's going to work out to his favor. Plus, if you've got David, who's been in the king's court, then David knows the ins and the outs of battle strategy and all this kind of stuff. Maybe he's thinking, Achish is thinking, I'm in control of this. This is going to work out great. It's like someone defecting to the United States from a foreign enemy, and they were in the upper tier of their military, and now they're on your side. And you think, wow, what a windfall. So maybe somehow he's convinced Achish of this. But again, this is practicing deceit, because it's not who David really is. He's having to tell some lies to win the favor of Achish. So keep this in mind, and then look at verse 6. There's just a little slight notice here. So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. What does that tell you about the writing of this, about the timing of it? When was this written? This is much later. This is much after. If you're talking about how Ziklag belonged to the kings of Judah, plural, to this day, this is after the division of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, when this is actually penned. Because verse 6 tells us this has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. So this is written much later. This is recorded much later. All right, Ziklag. And I think I have a map for you. Might be hard for you to see that small print on there. And maybe you've got a better one in the back of your Bible or in your personal study time. But if you will look that up, you might be able to find Ziklag. And one thing I want you to notice about Ziklag, and this is really demanding a lot on your memory. Originally, that would have been in Simeon. Later, it came to be in Judah. And Simeon, as a tribe, is basically absorbed into Judah, and Ziklag with it. Here's something that I thought was interesting. This goes back to Genesis chapter 49, verse 5 and following. This is their father speaking on his deathbed. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. All right? Of the two brothers, how was Levi dispersed?
They were not given an inheritance like the other ones.
They didn't receive an inheritance like the other tribes. They were the priestly tribe, and they had 48 cities assigned to them all throughout that land, dispersed throughout the whole land. But Simeon is later absorbed into Judah. And that's how they are dispersed. And the reference about how vicious they were goes back to Shechem, when their sister Dinah was mistreated, abused. And they end up slaughtering them in a wicked, fierce way. And so this is brought down on them on their father's deathbed. They're going to be dispersed in the land. And the thing that is so interesting to me is you go all the way from Genesis 49 all the way to where we're at now in 1 Samuel 27, and you realize that Simeon's been absorbed into Judah. Ziklag was originally in Simeon, now it's part of Judah. And you look at how God balances that prophecy in Genesis 49 with the fulfillment that we're realizing when we read our passage. How does God do that? How can He allow us our free will? We do as we want to, and God balances everything out in His justice. His prophecy comes true. Everything comes out just the way He said, yet each individual has chosen their own course in life. And you see that over and over and over again in the Bible, how God will say one thing way back here, and then it comes into fruition way up here, and everything balances out, and God's not forced anybody's hand to do anything. Everybody's made their own choice, and you see the fulfillment. It's marvelous. This is a mark of inspiration. It's just a slight little note on the side. And if you will mark those down as you go through them, the margin of your Bible will be so full of information to convince you of the inspiration of Scripture. It's just one of those slight notices that we want to give attention to. Comments here? Anything else? Ron? Yeah, Ron brings up back in chapter 26 about David and Abishai, these two guys going at night into this camp of the enemy with 3,000 people. You know there's sentries, you know there's watchmen there. They're going to post a watch all night long and all day long. How could they possibly get in there? And then you keep on reading, and there's the note, God put a deep sleep on them. And that's how they did it. God's been watching out for David. I don't know why He doesn't continue to trust him at this point. But this is a little glitch in David's armor that we're seeing. It happens to all of us. But this is something that sort of pulls us back to reality with God, that we shouldn't make those kinds of choices. We should know better. But it's tough when it's on you, when you're the one. And what would I do if I were in David's shoes? I don't know. I can't tell you that because I've never been there. But we have been in those situations where it looks like the only course we've got, the only choice we can make is to compromise with the enemy in some way. And maybe we've all been there in our own way. And so this is a text to remind us to be faithful. All right. Ziklag, southern part of Judah, and David is going to be conducting raids from there. And I want you to watch where he goes and what he does. By the way, if you will compare 1 Chronicles chapter 12, especially verses 20 through 22, while David is at Ziklag, while he's there for almost a year and a half with the Philistines, especially at Ziklag, while he's there, people continue to come out of Israel to him. He continues to gather more and more and more people into his armed forces while he's at Ziklag. They're leaving Saul's jurisdiction and they're coming to David. And again, the reference there is in 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Now, verse 7, David spends his 16 months there, and there's some sort of deceit going on, verses 8 through 12. Now, David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites, for they were the inhabitants of the land from ancient times, as you come to Shur, even as far as the land of Egypt. So if Geshurites, Girzites, and Amalekites are inhabitants of the land from ancient times, what's that tell you about those three groups? Who are they? They're Canaanite people. These are enemies of Israel. These are the folks that they're supposed to extinguish from the land. These are the ones where David is making his raids. He's at Ziklag, and if you were to look at them on a map, these would be people who would be in that area, but away from Gath, away from the eyesight of the Philistines, the other direction. And so he is raiding these kinds of people. All right? David attacked the land, verse 9, and did not leave a man or a woman alive. Why? Why would he not leave a man or woman alive? I don't want anybody to escape from this, to go back to the Philistines and tell them who I'm attacking. Because they don't know I'm attacking enemies of Israel. They don't think that's what I'm doing. And he didn't want to let anybody escape to get word back to the Philistines. So keep an eye on the logic that's going on here. He took away sheep, cattle, donkeys, camels, and the clothing, then returned and came to Achish. Now Achish said, "Where have you made a raid today?" If you are holding the King James Bible, it doesn't say raid. It says road. And maybe that's that old style language, but it is misleading to us. Where have you made a road today? Where are you blazing a trail? Really what it's asking is, where have you made a raid? Who have you attacked? That's what he's asking him. And David said, now compare verse 10 to verse 8. David said, the Negev of Judah. What's Negev mean? South Judah. South. Southern part. I'm attacking the Negev of Judah and against the Negev of the Jerahmeelites and against the Negev of the Kenites. I'm attacking Israelite people. And what do you remember about Kenites? Anything? What about if I said Midianite? Who was there? Who's from Midian? Where did Moses go when he left Egypt? Remember, for that second 40 years of his life, he went to that area of Midian. And Jethro, his father-in-law, in at least one place, is called a Kenite from the area of Midian. So Kenites are allies. They are friends of the Israelites. They're with them. They're friendly to them. And so are the other two groups. So he's telling him, David's telling Achish, I'm attacking Israelites and friends of Israelites. That's who I'm attacking. But up in verse 8 we find out, no, he's attacking the enemies of the Israelites. So David is ingratiating himself with people in Israel. Why do they keep coming to David while he's at Ziklag? Why do his numbers keep on growing? Because he's attacking the real enemy. Saul's out trying to attack David. And when he's not attacking David, he's not attacking the Philistines. But David's out attacking the real enemy, and people are coming to David to help David. And David's numbers keep on growing. But he's practicing deceit with Achish. I'm attacking Israelites and friends of Israelites, when in fact he's attacking the other side. So here is the deceit that's going on. Verse 11, David did not leave a man or a woman alive to bring to Gath, saying, otherwise they will tell about us, saying, so has David done, and so has been his practice all the time he's lived in the country of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying, he has surely made himself odious among his people Israel. Therefore he will become my servant forever. He's getting to be a bigger and bigger stink in Israel, because he's attacking Israelites and their friends. And so the bigger the stink that gets on him from there, the more he has to cling to me. I've got the upper hand with David. He's going to be my servant forever. There's no other place for him to go. This is it. So this is the way Achish is thinking, and he believes everything David said, but he's lying to Achish about who he's attacking. Let me ask you a question. Do the ends justify the means? Do special circumstances permit us to do the wrong thing to try to reach a good goal? This is situation ethics. Is that right or wrong? There are those teaching philosophies of the world today who will tell you that there is no absolute right and wrong, and that sometimes it's absolutely right to lie. It can be absolutely right to kill. It can be absolutely right to steal, depending on the situation. Do good people do wrong things for right reasons? That's called sin. That's what the Bible defines as sin. That is not the right thing to do. David's going about this the wrong way because he's trusting his own ingenuity rather than trusting his God, who has already delivered him over and over and over again. Your comments before we end this study sheet? We are through the chapter. Can I get a couple of guys up here to hand out a new one, and we'll get started on chapter 28. Thank you. Cole, thank you too. We'll get those out, and in the meantime, you can begin looking at chapter 28 with me, and you'll notice as you're getting your paper handed out to you, this is about the medium of Endor. What I'd like to do for you as we get... By the way, on that last study sheet, if you still have that with you, I did notice a typo on that. On the previous handout, bottom of page 3, it says 1 Samuel chapter 26, verses 1 through 12. That should be 1 Samuel chapter 27. So you might scratch out 26 and put 27 there on that old study sheet. I made a mistake. There is a map for you on the back page of this new handout. And you'll want to give some good attention to that. There's a primary area that we're concerned with on that map in chapter 28. And you will find that just below, just south of what's on that map is called Sea of Chinnereth, also known as Lake Galilee. And over to the left side, which would be the west side on that map, you will find Endor, Shunem, Jezreel, and Mount Gilboa. Those are all very important places for us as we get started in chapter 28. And what I'll do for you right now is I want to give you the organization of these final chapters in our study of 1 Samuel. Chapter 28, there is a gathering for the battle. The Philistines are going to locate at Shunem. The Israelites are going to make their way under the leadership of Saul to Mount Gilboa. Saul takes one look at the opposing army and begins to tremble. And he is seeking the guidance of God. But God is silent and will not answer him. Chapter 29 is the journey of the Philistines heading north. If you know where Gath and Gaza and Ekron and those Philistine city-states are located down toward the middle and southern part of the land over toward the Mediterranean coast, they have to travel up northward. The Philistines are choosing the area in the north to fight their battle. And they are migrating northward along the Mediterranean coast. And David is accompanying them at least part way until the Philistine commanders look at Achish and they say, "No way is he going with us. We don't trust him." And so they want to send him back. Now, chapter 30, David and his men are sent back to Ziklag. They can't go with them to the battle against Israel in the north country. They're not allowed to go. So they go back to Ziklag. When they get back to Ziklag, their families are gone. They're missing. They've been attacked by the Amalekites. Those are people that David's been raiding from Ziklag. Now David and his men are gone, and the enemy comes in and attacks Ziklag, takes all their stuff, and takes their families. And so when David and his men get back to Ziklag, their families are gone and all their stuff is gone. Chapter 31 is going to return to the battle with the Philistines, Saul, his sons, Mount Gilboa, and the outcome of that. And that'll take us through the end of 1 Samuel. So we are focusing on chapter 28 in this particular handout and the events that are there. Saul is not answered by God. He's looking for information. I'm going into this battle. I'm terrified. My knees are knocking. I'm trembling. We're outnumbered. We're outgunned. And so he seeks God's advice and God's counsel and God's comfort, and God is silent. And so what Saul decides to do is to try to do an end run around God and bring Samuel up from the dead, from the Hadean world, or in the Old Testament what they called Sheol. To bring him up, his spirit up from the dead through the use of the medium of Endor, a spiritist, one who talks to the dead, and to raise him up from the dead so that the spirit of Samuel can communicate with him and comfort him and counsel him about what's good, what's right, what's the will of God, what's going to happen, how should I go about it. And so he tries to do an end run around God by raising Samuel up from the dead. And you'll have questions about that, and so do I, about what exactly went on with that in the medium of Endor. The sections of our study are this. See you in a couple of weeks. We'll end class here, and I'm on vacation next Sunday, so you'll have to save these for a couple of weeks and bring them back with you. and we'll lay out our course of study in this chapter and then get into it. Thank you. We're dismissed from class.